Hey guys, it's Ben. I'm gonna make a quick little video to show you guys how I do my lighting setup. Michelle asked if I could do this, so um, here goes. So my lighting setup is actually really fast. It's only two lights and a backdrop, and I do this on all my assignments. It's just what I've always kind of done. Um, I have this backdrop, like a studio lighting backdrop, like you might see in a photography studio. I have a group that contains a directional light and an ambient light, and that's it. I'm just using Viewport 2.0, and I'm rendering not even with Mental Ray, but with Viewport 2.0 or Maya hardware 2.0. So, anyways, I'll walk you guys through step by step how I go about making this. So, let me just start from scratch. Let me delete this layer, and delete this light group. So, first of all, what I like to do is I like to make a backdrop. Setting up a scene, like these assignments aren't about setting up a scene, and if you're just using a plane, it looks kind of weird because there's this very abrupt transition between the plane and the background sky. Even if you're using physical sun and sky, it looks kind of weird. So I like to just do a photography studio backdrop so it gets kind of this nice gradient. So to do that, you go to polygons, you create a polyplane, you scale it up, and you take one of these edges, you click, you shift, double click, and then you go and you press extrude, this extrude button right here, and you pull it up, okay? And when you have this little thing going on right here, you can add divisions. So you can add like 4 divisions. It doesn't even have to be a lot. But then you just shape it to be a curve, okay? So now this is a curved backdrop. If you press 3, that will smooth it out and add more faces and stuff like that. So now we have our backdrop. So if you look at our character now, if you frame it how it would in camera, you're not going to be able to see the sky. And if you can see the sky, like if it's like this, and you can see your background, then you could just scale this up, and it's really easy to fix. So that's what I do. And then to avoid selecting this, I make a layer out of it. So I go down here and I press this little button, and that creates a layer from the selection, this far right button. And then I just rename this like backdrop layer, and then I rename my geometry, my outliner, backdrop geo. You don't have to do this, but okay. So now onto the lights that I do. I use 2 types of lights. I use an ambient and I use a directional light. So ambient lights, if you go to create lights, ambient light to make it, what an ambient light is it's a light that just adds ambient light. It's exactly what it says. It adds light to everything in the scene. It doesn't have a direction. It's light hitting something from every direction. So all this is basically doing is brightening everything in your scene uniformly. So if you press 7 to look at this, this is just the ambient light, and you can see everything's just its local color. And it has no shadow, it has nothing. So these are really useful for just uniformly bringing up the lights in your scene without really having to worry about like fill lights or anything like that. Again, this isn't like a beautiful lighting setup, but if you want to get started with just 2 lights and not have to worry about things, this is really easy. So add an ambient light, and then create lights directional light. And directional lights are a type of light that act only based on their direction. So if you move them around, it actually doesn't change anything. It's only the angle that they're at. So you can just, if you just rotate it, let's turn down the intensity of this guy. It's pretty intense. Let's actually turn down the intensity of our ambient light. And here I'm just clicking, and then I'm middle mouse clicking in the viewport to change this. You guys probably know that. I'm gonna increase the intensity again. So that's now our basic lighting setup. One cool thing you can do, just if you want to get a little bit more painterly with it, is it has a color R to it and a shadow color. So if you remember from painting, you can do things like, have your lights warm and your shadows cool. So if you want to get a little bit into that, then you could just make your light a little cool, your shadows a little warm, and that's that. Now, okay, okay. So the next thing we're gonna do, I want to show you guys these settings up here. I don't know if you've ever used them. They're only available if you're using Viewport 2.0. And part of what Autodesk was trying to do with the Viewport 2.0 is make something that could give you really good results without even having to render, hardly at all. It's really, really fast, and it's all displayable. So these settings up here are going to make your stuff look really good, really fast. So this button, you can see it has a little jaggedy edge and then a smooth edge. What this does is it turns on Anti Aliasing, which is, when you fill in hard edges of a pixel with smaller, more opaque pixels, and it makes it look smoother. That's Anti Aliasing, and you can see already what it's doing to the image. It makes it look a lot smoother. We're gonna skip this button. This button adds in screen space ambient occlusion, meaning that it's real-time ambient occlusion. And if you remember from painting, ambient occlusion is the act of light getting occluded in areas where things are close together. So again, that's also gonna make things kind of sit a little better. If it's a little too much, you can go into the renderer Viewport 2.0 settings, and you can scroll down and go to Anti-Aliasing, or not Anti-Aliasing, you can go to Screen Space Ambient Occlusion, and you can turn down the amount, right? You can do that if it's a little too dark or whatever. Okay, and lastly, what we're going to do is turn on shadows. So this is without, this is with, and shadows obviously do a great job at anchoring our object in the scene, so it's really important that we have a cast shadow. So this cast shadow right now is being cast not by our ambient light, but by our directional light. So you can see if we move the direction of our directional light, it moves, where the shadow is. We're going to do something. We're going to go into the attribute editor of our directional light, and we're going to change its shadow type from ray trace, which is default, to depth map. And now what that did, if you look at the shadow, is it looks all like it's straight out of Minecraft. That's because our resolution is really low. So what a light is doing is it's shooting off little rays, and depending on the size of those rays, the shadow it casts is going to be a certain, blocky size. So if we just turn up the resolution to something like, I don't know, 4096 or whatever, that's going to give you a lot more detail in your shadow. And turning up the filter size is also going to make it's, you can see it goes from jaggedy looking to, blurry, right? Which is, we want a softer penumbra, stuff like that. So generally 4096 and filter size of 3 is good. This all depends on the size of your object in the scene. If you guys are using the Zoma rig, the zombie, that thing is huge. It's I think they did it to real world scale, so it's 100, I don't know, 5 meters tall or something like that. It's really big. So it's going to be tough to get good looking shadows on that because of that, but hopefully you'll be able to do it. You might just have to really ramp up your resolution. Also, I figured out the fix on Kai's model for how, if your Zoma rig isn't casting a shadow, if you have problems with that, message me or something. I don't know, because I know the problem. I know why it's happening. Okay, so anyways, this is my basic lighting setup. So you would go into render settings, you would change your render type or your render using to Maya Hardware 2.0. You know, change it to 720p or 1080p, whatever you're rendering in, and do a play blast. And when you play blast, what I generally tend to do is do it as an uncompressed AVI and then compress it in Adobe Media Encoder. That's just me. If your computer is a Mac, it'll probably have an option to format as an MOV. I would do that because they are smaller and it's one less step for you to do, but I don't have MOV codec, so anyways. Yeah, sorry, I kind of rambled for a little bit there. That's my lighting setup. I hope this helps you guys a little bit. Thanks.